and welcome back to Indus Afghan Special once again. This is Zunaira Azhar.
And I'm Jawad Tehami.
Yesterday, we started the debate by incorporating the perspectives from the three major stakeholders of Afghan crisis, Afghanistan, United States, and Pakistan.
We were joined by Pakistan's National Security Advisor, Mr. Moeed Yusuf, and former deputy spokesperson for the Afghan Presidential Palace, Mr. Najibullah Azad, and Michael Kugelman, deputy director and senior associate for the South Asia at the Wilson Center in Washington.
Yeah, and today, to take it further and to dig deeper,
we are joined today by an esteemed panel, and Mr. Abdul Basit, former ambassador, is joining us. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Basit, and we are also joined by Mr. David Samuel Sidney. He's a political expert. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Sidney, as well. And we are also joined by Mr. Ali Sarwar Naqvi. He's a former ambassador, and we are joined by Lieutenant General retired GHULAM MUSTAFA, defense analyst. Thank you very much for your time, General Mustafa, as well. I'll begin with you, General Mustafa. The situation that we see in Afghanistan nowadays, the Taliban are making rapid advances, and the pace is really quick. That seems to clearly overwhelm the Afghan security forces. What do you think? What is going to happen in the coming weeks?
I think not only the Afghan security forces, most of the experts who have been commenting about it, as also United States of America, who withdrew in such a fashion that it allowed kind of a vacuum where there was nobody. Armed forces notwithstanding. As of now, the way things are unfolding there, one finds that every passing hour, in fact not every day, but every passing hour, the progress of Taliban on ground is overwhelming the kind of responses that are possible from the armed forces. And despite the fact that there are over 300,000 well-equipped soldiers, not well trained, not well trained to fight the kind of war that they have been pushed into, supported by Air Force. Again, here one actually is at pains to understand, fail to understand that if America, with all its power and for 20 years at its disposal, couldn't do what they think Afghan forces or their force can do right now, I just fail to understand. My own understanding of the situation is the Taliban are closing up to Kabul, and they're choking up spaces available for resistance by the Afghan forces, forcing the Afghan regime to come to the negotiating table in a position where they have to accept whatever Taliban have to offer them. Ashraf Ghani, as you see, is now being beleaguered in their own capital. His government seems to be melting away, and its rate, Kabul regime's rate is, so to say, either not there, or if it is there, it's only limited.
Ambassador Basit, as you are listening to what General Mustafa has to say, we also have reports, intelligence reports, that says it is a matter of 90 days that Taliban will take control of Kabul as well. If this is the situation, is there an active diplomacy going on between Afghan government and US government or the other competing powers in the region? Is it something that is happening at the moment?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I must underline that as a Pakistani, it pains me to see that the gory quandary of Afghans has not come to an end, and it continues with no end in sight. As far as reconciliation or I have been saying all along, and especially at this point in time, when the Taliban have demonstrated remarkable military prowess as well as diplomatic dexterity, I do not see why the Taliban at this stage should be reconciling or agreeing to any power-sharing formula. As a matter of fact, I mean, it would have been better if the US and its NATO allies had heeded Pakistan's advice 18 years ago and have brought the Taliban on board the Bonn process. As a matter of fact, many countries, even then and even now, are trying to stymie any reconciliation process and trying, because it serves their interests if Afghanistan remains in turmoil and unstable. So there are many internal and external variables which are, which in my view are not very encouraging. So my assessment is that Taliban would like to complete their control of the entire country, and then they would be amenable to see as to how they can form a broad-based government. As a matter of fact, the international community, rather than pursuing unrealizable objectives, it is time for them to put pressure on President Ashraf Ghani to step down. Because right from the word go, President Ashraf Ghani showed ill intentions by holding ill-timed presidential elections in September 2019.
Right.
That was a couple of months before the February Accord of 2020. So now it is time, if the international community wants this civil war not to get prolonged, if the international community wants Afghanistan to be in peace with itself, it is time for Ashraf Ghani to step down. And I would rather even suggest that, we should rather now start accepting that the Taliban, the momentum is on the side of the Taliban, and let them, in order to build peace, it is time for us to understand and accept ground realities rather than pursuing delusional objectives, which in my view would only protract the civil war. There would be more bloodshed, and that would not be in the interest of any country, barring a few
sorry for the
countries
interruption.
in the region.
There's a very important point that you have just raised, that if there needs to be peace over there in Afghanistan, of course, you're of the view that Ashraf Ghani has to step down. I'll take this point to Mr. SEDNEY. As Zunaira just mentioned, that there is an intelligence report by the US officials that the Taliban could run over Kabul just within 90 days, and this time span is much lesser than the time span which was earlier estimated, which was around 6 months. And Mr. Abdul Basit said that they are in such a position that they won't be able to negotiate with the other stakeholders. They are at the position of strength. Do you think there is a likelihood of the Taliban attacking the capital Kabul and capturing it, or they are just making advances to have that leverage to talk to all the stakeholders if any sort of an inclusive government is formed from a position of strength?
The Taliban may take over Kabul soon, but I think it is very unlikely given the current array of forces. There are a number of areas where the Afghan forces have been able to defend against the Taliban, but many more where the Taliban have made advances. However, in terms of the Taliban ultimate goal, it has always been victory. The peace talks in Doha have been a fake, a sham. They have been a way for the Taliban to distract everybody from their goal of military victory. There has never been anything but military victory as the goal of the Afghan Taliban. The United States has made a huge mistake by withdrawing. So now the Taliban still have their patron, which of course is Pakistan, but the United States has pulled back from Afghanistan and is not providing the kind of support that Afghanistan needs to resist the Taliban, who is advancing with the strong support of Pakistan.
All right. David, I see that you have an extensive knowledge of what has been happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And we as Pakistanis, we do not feel that we are ready for a resurgence of TTP, the people who butchered our children, and there has been a 9/11 every day in our country for 15 years. How do we dispel this so-called perception based on history that we do not want to engage with Taliban anymore? We have a stance where we want to stay neutral because we cannot afford to have more refugees over here. We cannot afford to have a resurgence of TTP here because the entire world, the Western world, including US, seems to be hell-bent upon it, that it is the Pakistan who is responsible for all the chaos in Afghanistan.
Yes, it is true. There is a strong movement now to sanction Pakistan because of the Pakistani military support for the Taliban, not the Pakistani people. I have visited Pakistan many times, have many Pakistani friends, and I know the vast majority of Pakistan do not want the Taliban to take over Afghanistan. As the Taliban advance, raping women, killing children, that is not something Pakistanis want. The problem is the Pakistani military, which does want the Taliban in power. That is a big problem for Pakistan. It's a problem the world cannot solve.
All right.
I'm sorry to say this.
Let's move on to Ambassador Naqvi.
Mr. Sidney, I would like to contest this particular assumption that it's the military of Pakistan that wants the Taliban in power over there in Afghanistan. As far as we know, as of today, the Pakistani government and the military over here in Pakistan are on the same page, considering the very topsy-turvy sort of a relationship between the military leadership and the political leadership here in Pakistan. But this time around, we see them on the same page. And what the voices which are coming from the government quarters clearly say that we have no favorites in Afghanistan and we want an inclusive government and we can only facilitate peace over there, the Afghan peace process, rather than becoming a guarantor. So the thing which you just said is a mere assumption that the military wants the Afghanistan in place in the government over there in Afghanistan.
And just to add to Jawad, when you talk about Pakistan Army and the Pakistani people, we consider it one entity.
That may be what you have to say on television because I'm very aware of the power.
Not at all, sir. Not at all.
You don't have any choice to say what you're saying.
No, we have all the choice to say whatever we want to say. That's why we are having a very open debate with you.
Okay, let's
For how long do we have to listen to this 30 years old mantra of Pakistan Army doing all the ills while there is uranium being sold in India's streets? What is this kind of discrepancies in the policies of the world where you are not ready to listen to a country just because you have to scapegoat and you have to finger point somewhere?
No, I think there are many things that Pakistan could have done over the years, such as taking the Taliban.
We have our own issues to take care of as well.
And sending them back to Afghanistan.
We can't
you could have stopped all the fighters that are coming over the border right now.
Sydney.
The Taliban is sending fighters over the border from Pakistan into Afghanistan.
Well, sir, 90% of the fence work is complete and we are in complete hold of our borders. Ambassador Naqvi, you're listening to the entire conversation and it is really disturbing to hear the same voices against Pakistan Army and Pakistan establishment because there has been a defeat on US's part. It has to finger point, it has to scapegoat, and that is always Pakistan. How do we dispel that?
Yeah, well, let me first begin by saying that the Bonn Conference of 2002 created an edifice of political government, of constitution, presidential elections and everything, which is now collapsing after about just near about 20 years. So, I mean, this is an artificial construct which could not have lasted too long. And two important players in this region, Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban, were kept out of the Bonn process completely. So, I mean, this is the chicken are coming home to roost because now it's obvious that this whole experiment was artificial and in fact almost a stupid arrangement. So that's one. The other is that Pakistan has always been seen in a negative light because it suits, as you said yourself, Zunaira, that it suits the world to put the blame on a neighboring country and leave it at that. Now, Pakistan army, with all its faults, is not supportive of the Taliban in Afghanistan. The Afghan Taliban are a distinct autonomous force or movement which was born in Afghanistan in 93, 94, and which continues to survive as an important political movement element. So let's be very clear. Pakistan can be, faulted for many things, but this is not Pakistan's doing. Pakistan has always said Afghan peace should be Afghan-owned, Afghan-led, and Pakistan has opened up with all the various factions, important factions in Afghanistan. Abdullah was visited Pakistan. Rabbani visited Pakistan. So, it's not just the Ashraf Ghani government. In fact, we have had problems with the Ashraf Ghani government, irrespective of all this. So,
all right.
We should be seen as a neighboring country deeply concerned about the situation in Afghanistan and not
a neighboring country that has paid a bigger price, I would say, for a war that was not ours in the first place. General Mustafa, while all the regional powers are talking to Taliban, let it be Russia, let it be Turkey, let it be US itself, let it be China, why is there a discontent in Washington when Pakistan is talking to Taliban or Pakistan is engaging with Taliban? Because if they are gaining the momentum and if they are becoming more and more strong every day, we cannot afford to be their opposite persons. We cannot simply. Why can't West wrap their head around the fact that for first time probably we want to stay neutral, but we want peace?
Zunaira, problem with US-led Western world is totally different than what they are actually saying. The basic purpose of US in this region is not to see peace in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They want to keep this area in boil. If you look at the two countries as one geographical entity, they want to keep that in boil, because if that settles down, US presence in this region is almost finished, and therefore their influence that they thought they should have in the region is going to go away. Number one, it's a power on the wane. It has lost almost every war that it went to. It has killed indiscriminately, whether it is Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, whatever. And the people, those who died at the hands of the United States of America, just because they had to prove a point, they have power. They came across a force in Afghanistan which for 20 years withstood all that Americans had to offer. Let's assume for a moment, even if Pakistan were supporting them, isn't it a defeat for a superpower who have lost 20 years, trillions of dollars, and so many people, and having murdered so many people, the innocent people in Afghanistan? Even 3 days back, they bombed a market, a medicine market in Helmand. The point is different. They are on the wane. They are on the losing side right now at this point in history. Americans recognize Taliban. They gave them the recognition as the political force in Afghanistan, as the military force in Afghanistan. They signed the Doha Agreement. Why couldn't they bring in Ashraf Ghani at that point in time? Why was that government kept outside the loop? Taliban have not outsmarted everybody around.
Right.
Taliban actually have weaned away Ashraf Ghani's political opponents also to its own side.
I
Now,
think
everybody's lost
General
money
Mustafa
positive.
makes a very fine point, because we were talking to Najibullah Azad, who was spokesperson for the President Ashraf Ghani, and he admits to the fact that there were no consultations with Afghan government when US was planning to withdraw. So even they are shocked and they are flabbergasted.
Exactly, and before that, General Mustafa, it was when we talk about February 20, the deal that was signed between the US and the Taliban. And by that very deal, signing that very peace deal with the Taliban, it gave them the recognition, and the Afghan government was not even the signatory into that. And later on, we saw that issue increase because Afghan government was not the party to that deal, and they were not ready to release the prisoners. And that became a contentious point as well.
Ambassador Basit, would you like to add to it?
Absolutely. I mean, by signing this deal on the 29th of February last year, the US, for all practical purposes, recognized the Taliban as the incoming government. And the US sought assurances from the Taliban rather than from the Kabul dispensation. So it was very clear as to where do the Taliban stand. Blame anyone. The question for me, which is important, which is the crux of the matter, is that what next? Now, we all understand the U.S. squandered 2 decades in promoting an artificial setup in Afghanistan, and by keeping the Taliban outside the political consultations, it has, for all practical purposes, invited the present situation. Now the question is what next?
Right.
As far as I am concerned, I do not see the Taliban playing second fiddle to the Kabul administration, because now they're only 150 kilometers away from Kabul itself. So I do not see any incentive for the Taliban to be sharing power. Now, important for the international community is to understand and accept the ground realities, so that the Taliban should not be doing the same things that they did in the 90s. From our perspective, from Pakistan's perspective, it would be important that Taliban, we need to see a transformed Taliban. We would not like to see the Taliban of the 90s. So it
very
is important
pertinent
for
point.
us
Very pertinent point. Ambassador, sorry, I have to go to David. David, when you, when I say you, I mean US, started to talk to Taliban, we assumed that now the world has accepted them as a political entity. And based on that, there were high hopes of peace in Afghanistan. But what is happening right now, it comes as a shock to all of us. I mean, the people of the world who are looking forward to a peace and a stability in Afghanistan. What went wrong where that everything collapsed in a spur of a moment?
First, let me apologize to you and to your guest, because I have not been able to hear the comments of the distinguished ambassador and
so
some of the other guests. So I apologize that I've not been able to follow the discussion fully.
So sorry for that.
In terms of what has gone wrong, many things have gone wrong. The United States has made many mistakes. President Trump made a huge mistake by appointing Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad and sending him to negotiate when the Taliban never wanted to negotiate. As I said before, the Taliban goal was victory. They used the negotiations.
So what you want to say is that there is a divisiveness within US that engaging Taliban in a political consultation was a mistake. There is a divisiveness about it in US.
Yes, the people who know Afghanistan best realize it was a big mistake and have been hugely critical of that so-called agreement. It was not a peace agreement, it was a withdrawal agreement.
All right.
But in the United States, there's a very strong move to pull back from the rest of the world, to become isolationist, to pull America back behind its ocean borders. And that is seen by both President Trump and by President Biden. This is something most people outside of the United States don't understand. that most Americans do not want what are called foreign entanglements. They want to pull us all back behind our ocean borders and to forget about the rest of the world. And this is what is happening with Afghanistan. So too many Americans, I do not support this, but many Americans just want to forget Afghanistan and push it away.
Yeah, it's totally understandable because it has been probably the US's longest war, and the amount of course, your budget that has been spent on it. But do you think the motive, the basic motive, was the war on terror, to decrease the terror? Whereas General Petraeus, I have a transcript of his talk in the Wilson Center. He says that security risks has improvised, they have increased. So do you think it has gone in a wrong direction?
Yes, the impetus for going into Afghanistan was 100% because of the attack on the World Trade Center and the killing of thousands of Americans. That was why the United States went in. But the United States never had an overall plan for Afghanistan. We never wanted to do nation building. All of our presidents said we will not do nation building in Afghanistan. We always tried to do it cheaply. And the American people, in the end, want to focus on the United States. They don't want to focus on Afghanistan or Pakistan or China or Russia. They want to focus on the United States.
And when you say that you want to focus on United States, is this about the problems that you are facing when it comes to Black Lives Matter, when it comes to gun violence, when it comes to what happened with Trump and the attack on the Capitol, the problems that you are having inside US?
That is part of it, but this goes back 200 years. The United States has always had a strong isolationist component in our history. People who want to focus on the United States, whether it's the problems of the present or the problems of the past. There are many other people who believe that the United States should be involved in the rest of the world, that believe the United States is inevitably going to have to be part of what's going on in the rest of the world. But that is an internal struggle inside the United States right now. Sadly, we have made a big mistake. I oppose President Biden's decision to abandon Afghanistan, as do many other people in the United States. And there's big debate here in the United States about that. And President Biden may have to pay a price for his abandonment of Afghanistan.
Wow.
So, Mr. Naqvi, I'll take this very point. So, as Mr. Sidney has just alluded, that it's a sort of a mistake on part of President Joe Biden. And a couple of days before, we have the statement from the White House by the spokeswoman Jen Psaki, quote, "We achieved those objectives some years ago." I mean, that very much points to the fact that those objectives were achieved a couple of years before. So why the US was still there in Afghanistan, and now the situation on the ground tells the entirely a different story. Don't you think it's like leaving Afghan people in lurch all of a sudden and going back to do something better for your own country and countrymen, the Americans?
As Mr. Sidney is saying.
Yes, I feel sorry for the Afghan population, which is not supportive of the Taliban, and that's a large chunk of the Afghan population. And the problem that they are facing is that they are so panicky and so fearful that they want to just run away and go into refugee status wherever they can go. So that, I think, is one of the big tragedies of this. And Pakistan was, in fact, the main supporter of Afghan refugees in the past. And though we can't afford to have that kind of numbers anymore, but we fully sympathize with them. And I think the effort that should be made should be a regional effort of China and Russia and neighboring countries, Iran, and they should all sort of try and put together some kind of arrangement where A, the population is taken care of and the panic should be halted, and B, the transition should be in an orderly fashion and not one of total abandonment and collapse. So I think we have to act diplomatically and try to solve the problem, because Pakistan has always been very sort of constructive and positive in trying to resolve problems in the region.
Yeah, the prime example is how we have achieved finally a ceasefire on LOC, despite the fact that what India has been doing on our borders was something that I don't know how the international community avoided to comment on. We will take a short break here. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Afghan Special, and we will continue the debate. David, the isolationist approach that you just mentioned is what you want for America, and it makes all the sense. Every country has its own issues that should be the priority for that country. But there is a camp in US. I happen to had some conversations with some intellectuals in your country, and they seemed obsessed with China, the connectivity and trade routes and all that. Do you think there are two camps in US at the moment? One who want to go all out for the regional powers to contain them and control the trade of the world. And then there is a camp that you were talking about who want this isolationist approach to prosper.
Okay, first of all, I personally am an internationalist, not an isolationist. So I am on the internationalist side of the argument in the United States, not the isolationist. And there are many camps in the United States, not just two. So there are isolationists who want to pull back everything. I would say Donald Trump is in that category. There are others, such as President Biden, who want to pull back partly from some areas, but who feel that Russia and China are such adversaries that we need to work against them and ignore the rest of the world. But an internationalist perspective, my perspective is that we need to pay attention to all of the countries in the world, not just a few, not just the so-called major powers. So there is a very vigorous debate in the United States with many camps, and I do not know where it will turn out. Sadly, tragically for Afghanistan, it is turning out horribly for the people of Afghanistan who trusted the United States. And that was a mistake, because the United States has proven in Afghanistan that it cannot be trusted.
From your point, I just want to interject one more point to that. When you say that you feel sorry for people of Afghanistan, of course you mean all the casualties of that war. And that is like a big range of list that I'm not able to mention over here. But the counterterrorism security risks that I talked about earlier, do you think US is in a position to follow the security risks trajectory and the internationalist trajectory at the same time?
Well, first of all, when it comes to the security risk, I think both the Trump and Biden administrations have made a major mistake. The Taliban are still closely allied with al-Qaeda. We are seeing many foreign fighters supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. And if the Taliban were to take power, and I do not think that is guaranteed to happen, I think it is likely to happen, but I think there's also a possibility the Afghan regime will survive. We just don't know what will happen. But if the Taliban come back, then al-Qaeda will come back with them. The Taliban-al-Qaeda relationship has always been close, remains close, and when that happens, the United States and the rest of the world will be at risk.
So, Mr. SEDNEY, a couple of weeks before, when President Joe Biden was speaking specifically about Afghanistan, in that particular news conference, he was of the view that the resources which were given to Afghanistan now, the troops as well as those resources are being shifted to other areas of security threat around the world. So what do you have to say about that? So that doesn't go with your premise that it's only about the welfare of the Americans themselves that the US has finally decided to withdraw from Afghanistan.
Actually, what the debate on the United States spending on defense security is very real right now. There are many people in the Democratic Party who want to cut the budget of the Pentagon to reduce the spending on military. So rather than moving resources from Afghanistan to elsewhere in the world, there are many people who are pushing to use that to cut back the overall U.S. defense spending. That is part of this bigger debate about, does the United States need a big defense budget? Or should the United States cut the defense budget and spend the money on social welfare programs here in the U.S.? again, there are many issues that we've raised here that go well beyond just Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is a symbol of whether the United States remains engaged internationally or pulls back and comes and focuses only on what's going on in the United States.
General Mustafa, there are a lot of comparisons being between what happened to U.S. in Afghanistan and what happened in Vietnam. Do you think U.S. has that realization that they have actually been defeated? And to add to that, what is the way forward for the world? Where are we heading?
Into more chaos, because there's an interesting book I just went through a few days back, is The Rise and Fall of Empires. When you rise about rise, everybody talks and gives his own opinion, but about fall of empires, that's a very interesting phase. When you look at the empire's fall period, it may extend like it happened to the USSR from 81 to 89, continue to put in more and more, continue to improve on its army, its weaponry and everything. And at that point in time, the United States were very happy that they have actually induced kinds of an economic meltdown in USSR, and it happened, and we saw that happen. But at the same point, while doing that to USSR, America was doing a lot to itself also. It's a power which has to go down. That's the law of nature. No power on God's earth, except for Almighty himself, has ever stayed on top forever. So that is one fact. It is getting weaker internally. Economically, it's now getting weaker and weaker, having spent trillions of dollars in developing a military might which actually failed in the field of Afghanistan. Now that it is faced with that specter of failure, besides finding scapegoats, it's going to commit more mistakes. That is what I think is going to lead to chaos. And that one big mistake of blunder would be if they get into entanglement with China. And that they're doing. And they're doing it deliberately. And what they've done to Afghanistan is not merely leave it like that. They've done to Afghanistan what they did to Iraq first time around. They left the job half finished, went back.
It started from 2011.
So Afghanistan and Pakistan, they want to keep this region on the boil, like I said earlier. Why? Because that rise of East, I'm not talking about China alone, Russia, other Eastern powers in this region, they're collectively rising to take hold of their own destiny in this region, and pushing Americans out of this region is what scares Americans the most. And because of that, they're going to commit more mistakes. We'll be sure about it.
So General Mustafa, as you just mentioned, that it's the shift of those things towards the East and the rise of the East that you just mentioned. So it's all about the connectivity, the regional powers happening to be together for the prosperity and the development of the region. And it is spearheaded by that very Belt and Road Initiative of China, and the flagship project of which is the CPAC, which happens to be in Pakistan. A couple of days before, we had been discussing this thing, the role of the peace spoilers in Afghan peace process. Some days before, there was a briefing which was solely held regarding the Afghanistan situation at the UN Security Council. India happened to be the chair of that meeting, but Pakistan was not invited to that. First of all, General Mustafa, what would you like to say about that? Was Pakistan's stance not proven that there happens to be a peace spoiler in Afghan peace process, and Pakistan was not invited to that meeting?
Of course, more than once. Pakistan has shown to the world not once, many a times. Kashmir is an example. The world has seen that, but opts to not do anything about it. Assam, the Citizen Act, the world sees that, opts not to talk about it, not to do anything about it. The fact is that if they want India to be the so-called security net leader in this region, they are actually betting on a very wrong horse. And what they've done is they have actually propped up India, that they, besides using Afghanistan's soil itself against Pakistan and creating more problems not only for Pakistan, Afghans, but for the US forces in that region. They have been trying to do that to Pakistan. Even yesterday there was a briefing by our ministers concerned. What is India trying to do right now?
So David, coming back to you, with aerial bombing happening in Afghanistan, I was just wondering if boots on the ground could not break that web of terrorism over there. Is this bombing going to help?
I don't think the bombing will be determined, because the fighting in urban areas and bombs cannot be very effective in urban fighting unless you have forward air controllers on the ground. So I think it is most likely that the bombing will kill as many civilians as it kills Taliban. Unfortunately, the United States made the decision to pull out its military forces. And bombing from afar using satellites and drones, et cetera, can be effective in a large-scale engagement where there are masses of troops. But that's not what is happening in Afghanistan now. What's happening in Afghanistan is house-to-house urban fighting. So I don't think the bombing will be significant on the ground. Where the bombing might be significant is in showing political resolve from the United States and other countries to continue supporting the Afghan government. The biggest reason for the Afghan Taliban's recent advances is that many people in Afghanistan believe that when the United States abandoned Afghanistan, that defeat was inevitable. So many people decided to stop fighting or to switch sides. If the United States and the rest of the world were to come to support of the Afghan government and show that they are committed to its survival, that could turn the tide.
Notwithstanding the defeat, or howsoever we put it, what has happened in Afghanistan, what is one reason that you would point towards that actually made all this so impossible to achieve what America wanted to achieve in Afghanistan? Was that a geography, a difficult terrain? Was it a policy failure? Or was it the regional competing interest interfering too much?
I think there are elements of all of those things that you mentioned. Afghanistan is far away. It's on the other side of the world from the United States. As I mentioned before, most Americans are focused on what's happening here at home. America's economy is booming. There's construction everywhere. The United States is getting richer and richer. But many people just want to keep what they have and get more. They don't want to pay attention to the rest of the world. But also, there have been many policy failures. The biggest policy failure was the United States never did nation building in Afghanistan. We always left that to others. The United States spent a lot of money, put a lot of troops in, but compared to what we did, say, in Japan or Korea after World War II, what we did was tiny, insignificant. The United States knows how to do nation building, and we failed to do what we should do to help build the Afghan state.
What is the last resort for U.S.? What do you think is your last option, policy option?
Well, as I said, there's the possibility that the United States and other international actors could come together and show a unified support for the continuation of Afghanistan. The statement that the United States representative made 2 days ago in Doha, that if the Taliban come to power by force, they will be a pariah state, is a new statement. The United States had not made that statement before.
Right.
So it's important to increase sanctions on the Taliban, to stop them from being able to travel, to take those Taliban who are in Doha and put them in jail. Those are the kinds of things that we should do.
Okay, Mr. Sidney, point well taken. Coming to you, General Mustafa, let's talk about the fallout of the increased insurgency over there, or the war that is being prolonged and the Taliban advances. So do we see a large refugee influx happening towards Pakistan?
Yeah, that is one possibility, but I think we must understand that these are not the same Taliban that we saw in 1996 onwards. They're not those savages that the world makes them out to be. I keep reading their handouts and I keep watching what they're doing and what they're saying. One, they are actually trying to create a situation where they can get others on board. Obviously, they would, because from the power, from the position of strength that they have, they would like to dictate to whatever that. That is one. Two, they're creating an environment where people listen to them, and they're listening to them. There is a displacement of populations, which is bad. And the sufferings are increasing as we go along with it. But sooner Ashraf Ghani and his coterie realizes that they're ouster, or they're leaving this state could lead to a peace, and the regional powers that are trying to do whatever it takes to create peace. Even our Prime Minister today was at pains to point out that we'll try and convince Taliban to talk to Turkey about the Kabul airport, and we'll try and talk to Taliban and to create that kind of all-inclusiveness that is needed, I hope and I pray that it doesn't happen, but that large influx of refugees that scares us so much, and of course, I'm one of those who have seen that happening way back in 79 and 80s. Nobody to look after them. The entire populace of something like over 5 million people coming to Pakistan suddenly, and Pakistan having to host them. That creates instability for Pakistan. Economic difficulties notwithstanding. So Pakistan is very sensitive to it. Pakistan is trying to convince Taliban, and Taliban themselves are very sure that if this happens this time, they are the sufferers and they will suffer the most. They will be at a disadvantage. That is a point that I think Taliban understand. Therefore, I hope it doesn't happen. But yes, there is suffering, and it might increase as we get.
So, Mr. Naqvi, do you also agree with General Mustafa, or do you also see a huge refugee influx heading towards Pakistan? And if, in that case, is there any sort of a strategy, since we have completed 90 to 95% border fencing, so do you think Pakistan would be better able to regulate that refugee influx?
Yes, of course. I think we will most certainly be able to have a better grip on the problem because of the fencing, and that has come at the right time, that we have more or less completed it. I think we should be prepared. We should be ready to face the influx if it comes. But at the same time, we should increase our diplomatic efforts. I think we have to send out the special envoys to all the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, including China and Russia, of course, which are in the region. And we should make it clear that Pakistan stands by its original position of a peace in Afghanistan with all the parties, Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and that Pakistan wants a negotiated settlement, not a military solution of this crisis. And therefore, we should mobilize the international UN High Commissioner for Refugees and all the international mechanisms for dealing with this crisis. So we have to have a multi-pronged approach to deal with all contingencies.
Okay, so Zunaira, I'll take this very point to Mr. SEDNEY. Mr. SEDNEY, very briefly, please, don't you think if there happens to be a refugee influx towards the Pakistani side, as we had been hosting Afghan refugees over the last many years, now 3 million almost Afghan refugees also residing over here, and Pakistan has been talking about the peaceful and respectable repatriation of those, don't you think that refugee influx, which might be happening in future, might burden Pakistan resources, and Pakistan would have to have the international support to deal with that?
To add to that, David, you know what was happening in Syria, and when Turkey had to take a lot of refugees in, European Union actually funded Turkey in terms of helping the refugees and all that. Now we are again back to the same situation, that we are expecting a lot of refugees, although we don't want it. But if it comes to that, is the world community going to help?
Yes, I think the world community will help. The United States, when it decided to pull out of Afghanistan, already started to change its budget and add money for humanitarian assistance. And of course, it's not just Pakistan. Iran, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan are also receiving more refugees. The refugee thing is happening already.
Yeah.
I have heard reports from inside Pakistan. Already Afghans are fleeing into Pakistan, into Iran, into Uzbekistan. In fact, they're fleeing to the United States as well. The United States is sending flights from Kabul to the United States, bringing refugees right now. So the United States is also taking refugees here as well. So it's going to happen, and unfortunately for Pakistan, it's going to be a big stress on your society, because the Taliban atrocities against women, against ethnic minorities, the Taliban taken over now are much more extreme than the Taliban who were there before. They are not nicer and kinder Taliban. They are crueler and more vicious Taliban. And that is causing, there are actually today hundreds of thousands of refugees in Kabul. They have fled Taliban. If the Taliban advance towards Kabul, they will flee towards Pakistan. So it is sad, but that is, I think, the likely future, that you will have millions more refugees over the next 2 years.
So, Mr. SEDNEY, the Afghan Interior Minister has said that in order to push back the Taliban, they are arming the local people over there. So there is a three-phase plan which they will follow in order to push back the Taliban. So if the government is not in a position to fight itself and it is going to arm the local people over there, don't you think that it would be resulting into a civil war, a large-scale civil war over there in Afghanistan?
That is already happening. Militia groups have already been fighting the Taliban, and it is looking more and more like a return to the 1970s, where there are all these different groups who are fighting each other. This is particularly the case, the problem in the case of the Shia Hazaras, because the Taliban are on record as saying they want to kill all the Shia in Afghanistan. And so therefore, they are very much committed to fighting for themselves, but they will also flee the country rather than be killed by the Taliban. So there is a humanitarian disaster that could be happening in the next few days, weeks, and months.
Ambassador NAQVI, what is your final take? What would you advise a course that might make this uneasy limbo in the world a little easy?
Well, two things. One, we must be prepared to deal with the contingency and with the negative impact of any serious breakdown of law and order in Afghanistan. And two, we have to get the support of neighboring countries and the major powers in this region and work with them to coordinate our efforts at the diplomatic level. You know, it's unfortunate that India, the question that was raised before, that India is holding the chair of the Security Council at the moment, but this is routine, and every month the president changes. So at the end of this month, I think the Indians will be out from the presidency of the Security Council. But they will remain members of the Security Council because they have been elected. So we have to deal with that problem as well, because India is playing its own games while a major crisis is developing in this region, and it's not behaving responsibly. But that is a very common. India has, as you mentioned, the LOC. Indians have been irresponsible power in this region, which is not understood or appreciated by the rest of the world, and we have to deal with it. So,
all right, David, your final take. Is there a silver lining, or all we see is a checkered kind of a relationship between India, between Pakistan, Afghanistan, US? What is going to happen?
Well, in terms of Afghanistan and Pakistan and the United States, unfortunately, I do not see any silver linings in the near future. Pakistan and relations with India, I will leave to the ambassador and others to discuss, who are more expert than I. But in terms of the U.S. relations with Pakistan and Afghanistan, I think that right now all the indications are things are going to get worse. There are going to be bigger problems. There will be an increase in refugee flows, an increase in terrorism, and the next chapter in this story will be a very different one than what we have today.
Is there a silver lining?
No.
All right. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. It has been great talking to you. This is what all we had to debate about Afghanistan for now. But as the events are happening and things are unfolding, the situation is changing so rapidly, Jawad, that we do not know what might happen tomorrow. Like even these panelists, if they think something is very gloomy, something that seems to be very dark and stark, might turn out to be something very bright the other day.
But the Pakistani authorities have always been saying that they are up for peace, negotiated political settlement over there.
Absolutely.
And the recent statement by Prime Minister Imran Khan speaks volume of that commitment towards the Afghan peace process. So Zunaira, although this concludes our debate on Afghanistan, a country struggling for peace while the US withdrawal from the country has raised the same questions again, which the entire world has been asking ever since the beginning of war on terror.
Well, and as I was asking again and again from David, is there a silver lining? And I have to say it seems difficult to stay optimistic, but that is all that can bring in new perspectives and initiatives on the table for an enduring peace and stability, not only in the region, but the world at large. I'll see you with Jawad some other time. This is all for now.
Thank you for being with us.